for a couple minutes before, and we've got a few minor things, business things to go over with you all before we kick off our presentation for the night. I'm Adam Lipke. I'm the sponsor coordinator and food guy here for FoxPass. We are a volunteer organization from the bottom all the way up to the top. If it's something you are interested in participating and contributing in some way, whether it is if you pay, you know your employer would be interested in sponsoring a session, let us know. And then oftentimes, not only do we throw up your business's information on our slide deck and on our webpage, we also would allow them to come in and present if they had something they wanted to talk about. Some of the recruiting agencies are a lot more interested into it, but if you know an organization that would be interested in benefit from sponsoring a little bit of presence here at the SQL community, please let us know. We were also pinging for volunteers for speakers. We're always looking for speakers. We do have quite a list to draw from. However, many of them do have to travel quite a ways or deliver remotely. It's always better if we can get someone to present in person, and especially if they don't have to travel very far in the winter. That's a big plus too. All right, then we're going to go, before we go to the community news, we always like to take a moment to share if anyone knows their company is looking for work or in this area, or they themselves are looking to transition to a new company. I know you have a nice and shiny new position. Are they hiring for more on your team, or are you the...
Right now it's me, and it will only be me for a little bit.
Curious looking for a data architect.
You're a data architect remote, or...
Whatever we can get. We are open to remote, so like remote or I mean, it's generally preferred that they're here, but we do work with remote as well. So.
Excellent. Thank you, Sean. Anyone else?
We're always looking.
Always looking.
So you'll hear Taliban a few times tonight, I think, but we're a small group out of Madison, Milwaukee, and we're always hiring for business intelligence consultants. So,
same with Skyline Technologies. We're always looking for more data engineers. Weird. But yeah, we're always looking for more data engineers as well.
Excellent. We'll go into our community news. Our past board of directors, and again, volunteer organization all the way up to the national and international level, but our board of directors were elected at past summit. I should remember which month that was in. November, I think. First week of November, yes. And these are our new board of directors, and I mean, yeah, if you want to be involved, there's a lot of different levels you can be involved at and learn from. If you missed past summit, you can get the content. Now, I need to read this because the old information I had was it was like $800 to get all access to all 100% of what was delivered at summit. Okay, so the numbers up here are just bonuses they're throwing in. They have 3, I think, different packages where you can buy the session, which is like $50 or something like that. You can buy per track, so you get 5 to 12 different sessions that are all kind of focused on the same track. And I think that is these are all digital downloads, and that one is around like $120, $150, something like that. Or you can buy everything that was delivered at Summit, and that is $600 to $800. I forget precisely, but that gets a bit more. But there are literally, I believe it is 4 days with, I think the fewest amount of sessions they ever have going at once is 12, and most of the time they have somewhere around 25 to 35 sessions going on. So you're literally getting close to $1,000 worth of content if you go that route. And pre-register for Summit for 2021. I think we are now moving down to Texas. This was traditionally out in Seattle, Washington. But I think next year, yeah, is in Houston. And the earlier you pre-reg, the cheaper it is. If you're only looking a month or two out, you are looking at close to $2,000, maybe $3,000, depending on if you go for the whole thing or just a 2 or 3 day portion ticket. If you pre-order in the next month or so, you're really only looking at about $1,000. So you can save yourselves a lot of money. My round trip plane ticket out there was only $200, so you can, if you pre-reg early, you can get a lot of content for really affordable, and it's a great networking opportunity. Also, if you register, a lot of our support or some of our financial support for our local chapter comes from registration for that past summer. If you register with our code, that money comes back to us.
I don't know if they're going to change their code this year. We usually get an email with what the code is, so I'll send it out to the group. If you're subscribed to the Fox Pass email, you can get it. It's a couple $100 off. Do you know why they moved to Houston?
I am not 100% sure. I think it is mostly access to hotels. I think because the Houston location, the hotel is part of the conference center.
Oh, okay.
And the Seattle location, the closest hotel is like 3 blocks away. And then several of them, and then it's like 3, 5, and then like 12 blocks to get to the next closest location.
Okay, that makes sense.
In addition to our in-person meetings across the country and world, we also have virtual chapters that meet, and there's always content. If you have a couple down hours every week, you can go online and check out some of the virtual chapters and what they have going on.
Just going to scroll through these. I'm going to post this on the resources for this meeting on our website, so you can go through it if you want to. This goes into the end of February, I believe.
And these are just some of the bigger virtual groups, but there are, I think, several hundred different virtual chapters out there. So there's literally every week something going on. You want to take an hour to check it out and learn something new. And do we have any nearby SQL Saturdays?
Cleveland, maybe? That's not too
That's
close.
not too bad. It's like 8 to 10 hours. Although Florida would be nicer in February. Well, they actually have 2 SQL Saturdays in February in Florida. And then there are some, we actually have professional paid positions in the PASS organization. So if you're interested, feel free to look on the PASS Career Center, or feel free to post any open positions you might have and are looking to recruit for. And then our org is our local chapter's information, and a growing, both in volume and in quality, YouTube channel, slowly but surely.
Yeah, so we have our own YouTube channel, like we were talking about before, but they also have PASS TV, which our stuff gets posted to, but it never bubbles up to the top content, right? So, but there's a lot of stuff there. I looked at it a little bit. Okay, that's pretty nice. Thanks, Adam. I'm just going to switch over to my presentation and we can get into the talk here. Okay, so I have a couple demos, so I'll be standing up and sitting down a little bit, but my name is Kunkel, and as we discussed before I went streaming here, I'm the president of FoxPass, and of course I have the help of Josh and Adam and Tom to put these things together every month. And I wanted to kick off 2020 just because you know, I wanted to put my face out there a little bit this year and talk about Azure Data Factory. So before I get into it, you know, who is familiar, first of all, with Azure in the first place? A little bit? Okay, that's good. Mostly everybody. Okay. And then how about Azure Data Factory? A little bit. I know Josh is. So I was going to ask, you know, what would your definition of Azure Data Factory be if you've seen it or interacted with it so far?
ETL tool?
Yeah, an ETL tool in the cloud, right? Pretty much. But it also does.
SRS on steroids.
Yeah, it does tons of other stuff, right? So
No,
that's
IS.
SSIS, yeah. I knew what you meant. So before we get into it, though, I wanted to thank the company I work for, Talavant. They're sponsoring the food tonight. So I'll just shout out to them. Of course, PASS for allowing us to have this group in the first place, and then Jack and Secure for hosting us in this nifty new building of theirs. So a little sponsor slide I put together Okay, so agenda tonight is what is Azure Data Factory anyway, beyond it's just an ETL tool in the cloud, right? And then we're going to look into what you could use it for, what I have used it for, some really good reference material after tonight if you want to go, read content after content of things to go teach yourself some things, and then any questions and discussions that we had about Data Factory and the things that I talked about. What I'm not going to cover is what's called the data flow, the mapping data flows. I'm just going to talk about how Azure Data Factory orchestrates activities. Data flow is a whole other subject. Even within what I'm going to talk about, you could talk for days upon days on the tasks and things that you can run with Azure Data Factory. But hopefully this gives you an idea of what Data Factory can do, and you walk away with some ideas of how to use it more effectively with your projects. Or you can propose it to your boss, and here's why. And then a little wrap-up slide. So what is Azure Data Factory anyway? So this is Microsoft's definition. It's a managed cloud service. It's built for complex ETL and ELT data ingestion projects, or integration projects, right? My definition is it's a cloud-based tool for ETL, exactly like you said. So that's the simple definition of Data Factory in my mind. I've used it mostly for an orchestration tool. It's been really helpful as long as you have enough data to support the cost of ingesting that data. But I would say right off the bat, you don't always want to use Data Factory for everything. Prime example is the demo I put together for the first part of this presentation. It's a really stupid implementation of Data Factory. You never want to do it. But it shows some activities, and I wanted to show them off. So does that make sense so far? Okay. This is straight from the kind of intro documentation page at Microsoft, and they define it further as a code-free ETL as a service, right? It's a service through Azure. It's all managed through the portal. It's a GUI. You can program some JSON in it. It used to be JSON. Version 1, I think, was all JSON, if I remember correctly. And then they slapped a UI on it, and it got bigger from there. Excuse me. You can ingest things with it, which is mainly what it's used for, in my opinion. Control flow is akin to the orchestration layer. And if you've ever used SSIS, you'll be very used to the control flow and data flow terms in Data Factory. Again, I'm not going to go into the data flow piece, like I said, mostly the control flow, which is more the orchestration layer, and you can call some things to do some transformation, which would count as your data flow. But did I see a hand for a question? No? Okay, sorry. And then, of course, you can schedule all of your tasks if you want to orchestrate something with a trigger. You can schedule it. You can trigger it with some storage on Azure or some other events. And there's something called the tumbling window, too. And I'm going to demo a little bit of that. And then, of course, you can monitor all of your pipelines. If you have a lot of things orchestrating things around your organization, you can monitor what's running. You can monitor failures. You can pipe things to what's called log analytics in Azure and get it to tell you what's happening on an operational level. Okay, so I'm going to walk through this really dumb Data Factory pipeline with some tasks and show you how it kind of works. Okay. So this is actually, let me back up. This is our Azure portal. Can you guys see that all right? Yeah, okay. So if I go to my home screen, which would look different for anyone who's changed your Azure portal in whatever environment you're in, but I can see that I have my intro dive FoxPass demo factory resource. I click on that resource, and here you're going to get management pieces from Azure in general, but to actually get into the factory, you have to click author and monitor, which takes you to another kind of portal for Data Factory. Okay, so you get the splash screen when you go into your Data Factory. Let me back up actually. When you create your data factory, you give it a name, you give it a location, kind of the data center of Azure that you're going to place your factory in. And the location should probably match whatever data in the cloud that you have provisioned in Azure, so it has faster communication. However, you can communicate across different regions. And there are some other options, but those are the basic ones. You start a factory, you open it, it's a blank slate. When you open it, you can create a pipeline from a wizard. Data flow, there's a template. So if you have a data factory that will do something that needs to be repeated multiple times, you can export a template. I think they have some baked-in templates you can use, but I haven't really played with that too much. And then there's a copy data wizard, because copying data is usually what you're going to want to do in Data Factory, since you can communicate to, I think, 80 or 90 different services. So you want to move something from MySQL to Teradata, or Azure SQL to an on-premise SQL server. You can do it in Data Factory. You can configure an SSIS integration. If you want to use Data Factory to run your SSIS packages that you already have, you can push them and run them in Data Factory instead of migrating them to a Data Factory solution. And you can also link this to Git. So if you're used to Git or Azure DevOps, you can link your factory to it and have an entire development cycle with it using Git and DevOps. Also, on the splash screen, speaking of resources from my agenda, you have a lot of videos to kind of go through, and they're pretty good about saying, here it is, here's how you can use it, there's the different features that came out. I've used these videos quite extensively to learn how to use some of this stuff. So that's your splash screen. And here's your author screen. It's a little pencil on the left side. You can see here I have 2 pipelines, a couple data sets, and data flows, which again I'm not going to get into. I didn't create any. When you open this initially, you're going to have none of this stuff. So you can create a new pipeline by hitting this plus button and say create a new pipeline. And you can name it and give it some options. So let's say I created this pipeline. And here are your basic options. What it's named, you can describe it, and there are a couple other things I won't get into. Then there are parameters, so if you wanted to send this, if you're calling this from maybe another pipeline or a Python script or something, and you need to send it some values to change its behavior, you can send parameters to it. There are baked-in variables within the pipeline that you can define to use later in the pipeline, and you can have some outputs come out of it. So again, being an intro, I'm not going to get into that, but those are some of the things you can do with a pipeline in general. Then underneath the pipeline, you have link services, you have data sets, and you have these tasks that you see here on the right. So I have a bunch of tasks. And what this is attempting to do, right, is in front of you, you can see these surveys that I've handed out. Every once in a while, people actually fill those out. And I take them home and I enter it into my Azure SQL database in like a flat table. But I need to split it up because eventually it goes into a Power BI report that's on our website that explains what people want to see. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to use my key of a contact. I need to generate a new contact to see what they said about FoxPass and what they want to see in terms of content and things. So I call a store procedure on my Azure SQL database, and I retain that ID. I take the comments that have been laid out on the survey. I take my event types, my interests, and location data that it's all in that survey there. And I split it out because eventually I need to make sure that I update the person's comments if they've visited more than once and have filled out that survey more than once, or I've inserted new stuff from someone who gave us new information or is new to the group. So you can do all of this in a store procedure in SQL Server. I highly recommend not doing this in Data Factory, like I said, but it's just an example that you could, and to show some really basic tasks here, right? So this merge context uses a task of calling a store procedure. So to get to that, it's under our general in our task list, and you can say execute a store procedure, and it's a drag and drop. So they really want to make this code free. So it's very UI intensive. So when you create a new task, you can drag and drop into your pipeline and configure it from there. So let's say I've created a store procedure task. I called it merge contacts. And I'm connecting to a link service that I've called FoxPass surveys. And I'll get into this in a second, but what it's doing is it's connecting back to my Azure SQL database server. And that's called a link service. And you use a link service to connect to anything, and then you can create data sets from there to use. The store procedure task only uses the link service. It doesn't use the data set. A little different than a connector in SSIS, I guess is what I'm trying to get to. And then you can say, I'm connected to my database, and you can see right here, I am calling a store procedure called integrate.mergeContacts. So I want to merge any new contacts that I find into my surveys table. If you had parameters in your store procedure, you can send them to the store procedure to run, and you can pull out outputs. And I'll show you that when you run the entire pipeline, you can see what goes into tasks, you can see what comes out, so you can reference them later in tasks down the line. Okay, so let me back up. I'm going to go over link services. So to set this up properly, I had to create a link service, and that's under your connections piece on the bottom left here. I know it's kind of hard to see. But you have connections and triggers on the bottom left in your interface. I've created a FoxPass Surveys Azure SQL Database link service. So that's connecting again to my Azure SQL database. To create a new one though, you click New, and you can see how many things you can link to, right? I think it's up to 80 or 90 at this point. I haven't kept up with what they keep adding to Data Factory. One thing you have to know about Azure if you're new to it is like, it changes weekly, so you have to keep up. Sometimes in a fashion that actually breaks your current solution, which is unfortunate. But so if you want to search for Azure SQL Database, type that in, click on Azure SQL Database. You give it a name, a description. You can connect via an integration runtime. And that's there because if you're connecting to something like an on-premise SQL server, you need something in the middle to allow Azure access to it. So an on-premise runtime would allow you to create this gateway to your local SQL server, for example, but the auto-resolved one would connect to anything in the cloud. So I'm going to keep it in auto-resolved integration runtime. And I can say I'm going to use my Azure subscription to connect to it. I have a Visual Studio Enterprise subscription with Azure. You can see my FoxPass server. I have my FoxPass Surveys database. I use SQL Server authentication. I'm just going to type in my name or my username. It should have admin access. They recommend that, but whatever access you need, right? If I can remember my password. And you can test the connection before you make your link service live. Okay, great. Now I can connect to my Azure SQL database. And that's like, oh no. Sorry, ClickShare got in the way there. Okay, so I created my FoxPass Surveys link service, and if you click on this, the same settings pop up and you can change it if you need to change it. So back in my pipeline, I'm using that link service to call that store procedure, right? And this green line means that after this task is completed and successful, move on to the next thing. And you can see that I've branched it, right? So after this is done, all 4 of these things will run at once. One of the nice things about Data Factory is that there's a lot of parallel things that you can put in place. So if you know that something isn't depending on something else, but you want to run it at the same time, you can go ahead and branch it like this. There are also conditional branching pieces, not as robust as SSIS. Like in SSIS, you can put if this value equals this right on the branching arrow on the conditional, but this allows you to move around if you have a failure, if you complete it all, regardless of success or failure, or if the condition is skipped, or if your task is skipped for the time being. So this will say this has to be successful for these 4 things will run, and then it continues from there. So these things are copy data tasks, and that goes under move and transform, or that you can pull it from move and transform and just drag and drop it again, just like the store procedure task. I think it's understated how important the copy data task is because it can get pretty powerful. It's what costs a lot of money in Data Factory potentially, and it's what I think you're going to use the most to move things around. At least stage it for transformations, right? You're going to copy some data. So you have a source and a sink. The source is going to connect to a link service or a data set. The sink is also going to connect to a link service or data set, and you map them together so you can copy one thing to the other properly. So my source is connecting to FoxPass Surveys raw, which is a data set that is pulling from that link service. So I'll go over a data set really quick. FoxPass Surveys raw is a data set that is connecting to the FoxPass Surveys link service, but it's specifically calling out this table, right? So I could use this as it is and just pull stuff from this table, and you can preview the data here. think it only pulls the first 10 records though, so it's not a great one. So I have 2 records. It's me with 2 different email addresses just to show you how this pipeline might work. So you can see some previews there, but, oh, go ahead.
If you wanted to like see the top 10 or the top 11, if you change your, well, no, you don't have it. Okay, good.
Yeah, so this is just the connection to a table, but I know you're going to talk about, you can customize what you pull with your SQL statement. So that happens actually in the pipeline, in the copy activity itself, connecting to that data set. So it's almost pointless at this point if you're using a query here to pull from that data set, because you already said, let's connect to this table, but you're overriding that with a query. So right here, for this copy data source, I'm connecting to the data set, but I'm saying, I actually want to select everything from my get comments integrate table. And at that point, you'd see, again, a maximum of 10 in the preview. And then I want to sync to another data set. And I want to say, before I sync to it, I have a pre-copy script, truncate my integrate table, and then map over. Luckily, all my my columns are the same, otherwise you'd have to map everything properly. Map over your source and your destination. Right? So that's a basic copy activity. And I run 4 of those to get the flat view of that table split out into these temporary integrate tables. And then the last step is to call specific store procedures to merge that data into the final data set, right? And then I can pull it into Power BI, and then it'll finally look cool, potentially, if I use the right colors.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure. No, please.
So like if your get event types failed,
Mhm.
because those are running in parallel, and like, let's say you didn't want to merge comments unless also event types, would you have to map that out serially?
Yeah, you would. So yeah, so for example, to draw that out a little bit, yeah, if like this is event types fail, only this would fail because it's in that dependency chain. All the other ones would still run. So you'd have to construct some dependency chain to follow that. Yeah. All right. So just to exemplify running this and to see some of the stuff you can get out of running it, I'm going to hit debug. You can also trigger it. So a trigger will either create a schedule, or you can trigger it now, and you can see a little bit more of a robust, monitoring piece of it. But we're going to do debug, which is nice just for you're developing something, you want to see it run. Okay, so in the UI itself, well, in the pipeline itself, I should say, it refreshes for a while. I'm kind of a neurotic refresher though, so got to see the stuff working, right? So up here you can see everything was successful, and then down here you can see some more statistics about it. And like I was saying, you can see what went into each task and what came out. So you can see that it selected this as a source. We're going to sync to this destination table, and a little neat thing, if you're looking at like how much we ingested, if it's a big data set, like gigabytes at a time, you can get more statistics in your copy doing this. So there's also a way to pull the metadata out of the copy activity using some of that output stuff. So you can kind of log, like this is how many bytes that I moved, things like that, if you're doing some auditing and logging. This is a nice feature just to get a peek at what it actually did. And that's my pretty dumb data factory. But are there any questions on kind of like the basic workings of data factory, pulling in tasks, configuring it? I mean, there's a lot of tasks, and I'll go over how many things you can do, and they're all configurable differently. So
And debugger is just one record at a time that you're going through, or?
a debug will debug the current pipeline you're on.
Okay.
Yeah. So if it gets, if it turns into an octopus, it's spaghetti web or whatever, it'll try to run the whole thing.
So if you have like inserts, does it actually insert into the table, or does it roll back?
It'll actually do what you tell it, yeah. So yeah, you gotta be careful. That's the thing. It's just orchestration. It's just like any other programming language. It does what you tell it, right? It doesn't have safeguards unless you tell it to. So And that's the nice thing about integrating with DevOps. You can play with a bunch of stuff in development. It's good to go. Post it up to your production environment. So.
And can you, like, let's say that the get comments and the merge comments, I want to kind of not run it on an execution. Can you like dummy those out?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. So it's per dependency line though, so you can put these breakpoints in it, and they're right here. So if I didn't want to run this merge after my get location, that's all you do. Now that doesn't work with a trigger. That's just in debugging. It's like any other debug with a breakpoint, like in Visual Studio or something. So yeah, that's a good question. Now if I did this one, it wouldn't execute anything afterwards. So sometimes you kind of have to move some dependency chains around to see what different pieces will work. And I've done that before, and then rechain it, say, yep, that all works. So it's very useful. Okay, back to the actual presentation here. Okay, so what could you use it for besides making stupid Data Factory examples? These are all the tasks, and I just, I took those drop-down menus and I took some screenshots, and I took it kind of from what I use the most to what I've used the least. And I think it's just because mainly on the projects I've been on and kind of the complexity of the things. So on the left here, you have your generalized things. You have append variables using the variables within the pipeline, right? You can delete, I believe, file system references. I actually haven't used that too much. You can execute other pipelines. So if you needed some dependency chain through pipelines, you can do it that way. And I don't think there's a limit on that. So you can keep kind of diving through a parent-child relationship with pipelines. Again, execute an SSIS package, right? Get metadata. I kind of mentioned that. You can get some metadata from these tasks. And you can get metadata from resources. So if you wanted to pull something from your Azure Data Lake and see how big files are or something, or log, when it was last written, you'd use a metadata task. Lookup is if you need to look up values and use them later in the pipeline. So if I wanted to go and look up a table in my surveys database and actually use those values in my pipeline, I'd use that task. Store procedure, we saw that. You can set a variable, right, on the fly that is used within the pipeline. Validation, I'm not sure what it does. I haven't used it before. So have you used it, Josh? No? This is a web call, so if you wanted to expose some data from a website that's open to the public type of thing, or you have like a web API access or something, you can use a web call for it, which is useful if you want to track some public data, right? Webhook, you can set a webhook for a web application, and wait is exactly how it sounds. You want to stall the pipeline for a certain amount of seconds. Copy data we went over. Data flow is basically transforming your data, but again, not going to get into that. Filter, so if you have some items coming through your pipeline and you want to filter it to branch things or just filter junk out, you can use the filter for it. For each is really powerful. It's not actually a loop. It's a batch of 50 things running in parallel, and then they loop through that. So if you wanted to copy 50 different things at once, coming from a lookup, like you have lookup values and you want to cycle through them, you do a for each, I want to copy things based on these values. It'll do up to 50 of them at the same time, or anything in the for each. You want to run 50 pipelines at the same time? You could, and even more than that, but 50 is the batch kind of size for each loop. Does that make sense? Kind of roundabout, does that make sense? If condition, again, if something is true, do this, otherwise do something else. Switch is, it's like an if condition, but it's like a case statement in SQL. You can kind of line it up, so you don't just have true and false values. Until it's a loop until a condition is hit. Databricks notebooks, you can call Databricks notebooks, and if you're not familiar, Databricks is a set of code that sits on top of a Spark cluster, and you can run that code, and it supports Python, R, Scala. So if you want to do some transformations or call a Databricks notebook for whatever reason, you can do it here. And actually, if you run a data flow and it runs some transformations, it's going to spin up a Databricks job in the background anyway. So it's kind of nice to familiarize with like yourself with how that works. HD Insight, if you have any HD Insight tasks, I haven't really used it. I was familiar with Hadoop like 10 years ago when it started, and it's totally changed from there. So you can do some tasks with some big data stuff there. Call an Azure function. You can run a batch service, which is totally customized. Azure Data Explorer task. Use SQL, which I don't even think they're supporting that task anymore, right? Not use SQL at least. Yeah. In case you had a job. Yeah. And then some machine learning stuff. So there's tons to do in Data Factory, right? You can do a lot of it. Okay, so I'm going to give an example of the for each and how that works. And you're going to want to get used to using dynamic content in your for each, and I'll walk through how that kind of works. Right? Yeah.
So, at a very problem, it's kind of easy to write. If you compare with SSIS or any other EDA tools like Kunkel or what other features which are not there in this legacy EDA tools, Azure Data Factory tools?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's Azure native, so I would say it's good to connect to a Microsoft cloud solution. It has the parallel for each looping, which I think is a benefit to it compared to, say, like an SSIS package. It has native connectors for that link service, so you don't have to define your own ODBC connection. That would be a big thing. And just the power behind it, I think, is good, like up in the cloud. Would differentiate it in my mind. Plus all the tasks that you just saw, I think are. Yeah.
And the web part of it you explained that. So can you directly connect to the APIs, like use of APIs and trigger that, do web scraping directly and get the data in the data factory?
You can. I think you can. Yeah. I haven't done that stuff that much personally.
How you interact with the APIs is basically, let's say you are doing getting some data from a public website. So the API will bring the data to your on-premise setup first, then you connect another ETL tool to kind of engine the data to your further layers of database. Right.
I mean,
So my question is,
yeah.
can you directly connect to the APIs also? Can you do directly the web scraping using Azure Data Factory?
Web scraping. I know you can interact with an API, right? But I'm not sure about the web scraping. There's probably.
Well, right now we kind of write the Python code to go to the website and to connect it. And then you kind of load it to the text or CSV file. Then you use another EDA to convert it further.
Yes, I think I know what you're saying. Like your solution would be scrape that website first, create some data from it, and then have Data Factory pick it up.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah, that's probably what you'd have to do. But that's a good question. Maybe, I don't know if you can scrape a website directly in Data Factory without that intermediate step.
I think there are some tools out there, especially with AI, that are designed to feed into Data Factory, but I don't recall anything specific.
Okay.
A quick aside to your first question, the differences between SSIS and Azure Data Factory are going to be growing because the funding for development or new development in SSIS is very small and has been being reduced significantly. And whereas the funding and the man hours that are going into Azure Data Factory are growing. So there's going to be a lot of new development and new support for Azure Data Factory, and SSIS as an on-prem solution has pretty much been deprecated. It's not no future development focus.
Yeah, Microsoft is pretty hardcore into Azure lately, so I don't know what's going to happen to SSIS. But it's useful. SSIS is useful.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
it has its uses.
Yeah.
And the big thing that I really wish that Azure Data Factory would actually fix is in Azure Data Factory, SSIS. So in SSIS, let's say you're pulling in some sort of like a data source. Like let's say it's a max character value. But in Azure Data Factory, you can't set yourself limits. That's how it was in the past, where you couldn't set yourself limits. So like in SSIS, you're like, all right, well, I have a max character value. I want to pull in like maybe the first 30 characters or something like max character value, you're not gonna really be able to digest that much data. There's just no reason that you need to pull in that much. So a lot of times you wanna just pull in the first, like, I don't know, 30 characters or 250 or whatever else. And it lets you do that in SSIS, but in Azure Data Factory, you have to have the same exact source. There's no way to cut it off. So
That's true.
you can, like, load in a certain amount of data.
Yeah. Yeah, you'd have to define, like we were talking before, like a query that you'd specifically override how much data you're pulling in, something like that. So yeah, there are definite differences. And I'd say before they added the data flows, like it was purely an orchestration tool. So SSIS had its place, and now they added data flows, and it's like, okay, now this really is turning into SSIS for the cloud. So, but it does have its differenes.
Not sure if you cover in the next slide, but one more question I have.
Sure.
So does it provide more functionality for data harmonization? Just give me a use case. So let's say you have 100 plus files in different formats and different art of colors, and you want to consume that. But right now, if you go into a legacy field, right, you need to build 100 plus data flows or interfaces for that, because you each different format, each is different in different art of colors. But ideally, you want those 10 colors of all the different as a target. So is this something which is simplified here, like file handling at a overall level or data harmonization?
There is a way to construct your pipelines to harmonize that data, right? You still have to define your connectors to the different sources, but you can get it into one place and do what you need to do with it to get it to look the same and yeah, harmonize it, right? And make it cohesive. So actually one of my slides does mention a solution that I've worked on, not by myself, I had help, you know, because it's a big deal to do something like that. So, but eventually it all ends up, the solution all ended up in our Azure Data Lake with the same file extension. And then from there, you can just pull it really easily and do data manipulation on it to, you know, build a warehouse, for example. So yes, there's a way to do it. It's not baked in though. You do have to configure it quite a bit, right? A lot of parameterization to get something like that done. But it allows you to do it, yeah.
On your select, on your source, like you said, select star from a table name, can you do complex stuff like inner joins or leftover joins to other tables, or are you only
Yep.
restricted to that table?
You can throw whatever query at it, and it'll send it back to the source, and then post the data through the link service to give you the result. So as long as your source system supports your query, then absolutely, yeah. Okay, so I've made another pipeline. This uses a lookup and a for each. So this is going to look up some values. It's going to run a for each, and then based on each one of those values, it's going to run the task that's in the for each loop at the same time. The settings for my lookup is example data set, which goes back to the FoxPath surveys link service. It's just a different data set. You can see that it's pulling in some contact names and some emails. So I'm just going to use a direct table connection. I'm not going to use a query because that's what I want to see. And then it's going to pipe that over to my for each. Now here's where the parameterization comes in, and this is where some of the more important things in Data Factory come in, because you probably don't want to create tons of pipelines for doing the same thing. So you want to parameterize some things, and you can parameterize Data Factory all over the place. So one of the things you can do, and it recommends this actually, you almost have to, right? Like you look up some values and you have to tell it what values this for each loop is going to use. In order to do that, I have to say dynamically this activity, the lookup example.output.value. So it'll look at all the rows that come in from that lookup. And then I can use it inside the for each loop, right? And what that looks like, oh, I keep pausing this thing. The activity inside of for each loop is another lookup, right? I'm not going to do anything with it. I just want to run it and show you the output of the data. And what the lookup is going to do is take for each record, it's going to say, select all from my contacts table, but I'm dynamically saying for each item that comes into the loop, where my contact ID equals that contact ID, right? So I'll debug this quick. And you should see the lookup will run, and then you should see a large list of things that are running at the same time. Oh. Okay, so here you go. So for each one of those contact IDs that I brought in from the lookup, it's going to run whatever is in that for each loop. And through the inputs and outputs, you can see exactly what came in terms of values and what came out. So this first one we have, this person come out of the lookup, ID 12, and you look down here, and it'll be a different one. So it's for each one, right? So like personally, I wish they would change the name of the for each loop. It's almost like a batch loop. You know, you can run things in parallel, but it's also looping. So I don't know if they'll change that ever, but it's kind of a misnomer when you use it, just to beware. But it's a great tool. You want to run a bunch of things at once. That's what Data Factory is good for, with this looping. All right. Okay, so from there you have your pipelines created. You want to run them. I've already shown you the debug, but I'm going to show off some of the trigger mechanisms so that you want to run something in automation every day. You can, they bake that in. So you don't have to have, like SQL agent or whatever orchestration tool, or I'm sorry, scheduling tool to kick off your pipelines. You could, right? You can write Python scripts to call Data Factory. I usually do it through the UI though to schedule something. I don't know, Josh, if you've used like a like a scheduling tool outside of it.
Well, it's kind of like creating tools. So we
Oh, they did.
about processes like that. We can't, but
So you can't say how you did it,
Yeah.
but you have one. Okay.
we
Yes.
have
It's
Yeah.
possible to use like an enterprise schedule.
PowerShell interacts with it. Actually, PowerShell interacts with Azure quite nicely. You just have to learn all the libraries and how to do it. But they're pretty good about telling you how to use PowerShell with Azure. So you can definitely kick off a pipeline with PowerShell.
So to like, if you had a lot of dependencies, would you want like a master pipeline that would
Yeah.
trigger and then call a whole bunch of other ones?
Yeah, so if you have like your daily processes and, you have to wait for your sales systems to stop replicating or something. And then you had all this stuff running after the sales stuff is done, you can have that dependency. And then, yeah, you can have a master pipeline that says, yep, sales are done, let's go kick off all this other stuff. Lost my window. There we go. So if I wanted to trigger this, right, I could trigger it now and it would run it in the monitoring space here, or I can create a new trigger. It gives you quite a few options. So I'm going to try to name my trigger. Fox Pass demo trigger. And you can schedule it, right? And you can give it a recurrence, a minute, hour, day, week, or month. And each one of those kind of has a different option because it's a different timestamp, right? But one thing I want to mention that if you're running something every day, actually it applies to all the time triggers. It's in UTC, so you have to kind of take that into account when you're running these things. And one of the things I've run into is Central Time shifts with daylight savings, and UTC does not. So if you do have a dependency chain, it'd be better to do that, right, with your organization, not the scheduled UTC time. Tumbling window is in this window, execute a certain amount of events, and then this is an event trigger. So I'm not going to go through all this, but basically something triggers your pipeline. Yeah. And how I've done it usually is something writes out to Azure storage, and then this is looking for that. And it says, let's go do something.
What's tumbling window again?
It's a window of time to give it to check for something,
Oh, okay.
to run.
Can you pause these schedules then too?
Yep. So if I wanted to, actually, let me just create this. If I want to start it in a suspended state, I can say activated no, right? Let's do, this is every day. Let's see, 3 in the morning. CST is 9 o'clock, I believe right now. Okay. So I just created the trigger and it attached this pipeline to the trigger. The trigger can kick off more than one pipeline. So you create triggers, they're separate from pipelines, you attach the pipelines to it. So now I have my FoxPass demo trigger and I can run this. I can activate this, or I can, I believe I can run this trigger right from here. No, you got to run the pipeline. Okay. So you can activate this or pause it here, or delete it entirely, right? And the triggers are nice. Say if you had a parameter on your pipeline and you needed to change how the pipeline runs based on that parameter, you can set up different triggers at different times with different values for those parameters. So if you need to load things using the same pipeline at different times of the day, you give it some database ID value or something. Those triggers can handle that too. So if I go back to my pipeline and I want to trigger it now, say it's running. It's not going to show up down here like the debug. It's going to show up in the monitoring tool. And it'll show all the pipeline runs here in your factory. So you have to click on kind of a sub-level menu to see what it's actually doing right now, or what it's done in the past. And you can rerun pipelines, and you can expose all of the rerun history too. And this is going to look exactly like the debug, right, at this point. But the triggering gives you a history. And it looks a little bit different. Like your refreshes up here, things like that. So now my pipeline's finished. I go back to my pipeline runs, and you can see it succeeded. Okay. What time do I have? Oh, I'm running out of time. I'll try to squeeze it in. Okay. So what have I used it for, right? This is some simple examples, some simple tasks, and we kind of got some questions about how you could use it further, right? So one of the things I did use it for was a dynamic data ingestion, which kind of gets to one of the questions you had. What if you had, 10 different DB2 servers? You had a couple different file system locations and some SQL Server locations, and you wanted to ingest things from all of them all at once. You can tell Data Factory to dynamically connect to all of those, right, with some metadata. And this is why I have this here. That metadata can drive those parameters for lookups so that you can send things to tasks dynamically within the pipeline, and in this case, connect to tons of stuff all at once. And at the end of the day, it ends up in the data lake all conformed to how you want to see it. Now, I didn't, again, like I said, I didn't work on this myself. I had a team of people to work on this. It came from the brainchild of Sean Forgatch, who used to be the president of FoxPass, and now he works for Avanade. So I worked with him for a while, and we actually put this together. And I think he took this, and he now has some super smart version of it. So, but it works for the use case that we implemented it in, and it's used every day at the project. So it came out pretty nice.
So with that, like if you had different regions, like central US, northern US kind of thing, the cloud things,
All the cloud locations.
the cloud locations, if you want to look at stuff like at the corporate level, do you have to ingest all of those locations together, or is the data replicated on all the regions?
That's a good question. Well, so say you stood up a data lake, right, in the central US location, but your data factory is in the east location, you can still reference that central data lake location. It's just where they host the service. But as long as it's all under the same subscription, like the company subscription, you can still access it. So the regions, you really don't have to worry about if it's replicated, because that, based on where you put that resource, like which location, you can access it from your Azure subscription. Yeah. It just might take a little longer, because that data center is trying to communicate to the central. Right. Does that answer your question? Okay. Okay. So cloud data warehouse. In September, myself and Justin Stadler from a project I was working on, we talked about this, but because of that because of that data ingestion framework that I just showed, they have a bunch of stuff in their data lake, right? And we built a cloud data warehouse purely with Azure Data Factory and Databricks, and every day they post gigabytes of new data from their sales system into Snowflake, which is a massive parallel processing database. So we used a lot of dynamic calls to Databricks to do incremental transformations, the data to post into Snowflake. And from there, the business users and data scientists and executives can go in there with Tableau and get some nice dashboards out of it. And it's extensible, so you can take this solution and you can just add metadata to it, and you have a new data set. You have a new data mart in your data warehouse that will surface in Snowflake. And I had this here to show off like this. We have a master, like you were saying, a master pipeline that calls sub-pipelines for each data mart, right? And again, managed by lots and lots of metadata. Okay, so some great reference material as we end this talk. From Microsoft, they have a pitch to this is why Data Factory is amazing, so on and so forth. So I'll post this, of course, to the website so you can take a look. You can go through there and read that. Channel 9 is a really good resource from Microsoft. They have a lot of learning tracks, and it's just videos. It's like a television service. I've learned a lot just by watching a couple guys go through Data Factory processes, things like that. The Microsoft Docs, this is kind of a kickoff to the technical workings and how to use different tasks and things like that. And this is a link to the Data Factory portal if you wanted to just dive in and play around with it. So these are some blogs. edX is really nice because as long as you don't pay for the certificate, like the piece of paper at the end, you can still take the course for no money. So if you want to teach yourself some things, you can use edX. I did that with some Power BI stuff and didn't really want to go through the test or anything. So Catherine Wilhelmsen, she just wrote a 25-part series leading up to Christmas about Data Factory. So right now, if you click on that, that'll take you to the intro to that, and it will be, this talk on steroids, probably a lot better, and take you through the whole thing for 25 blog posts. And she has, she speaks at past summits, she speaks at Microsoft. What's the big one in Florida?
Is it ready?
No, the Ignite. Yeah, she spoke at Ignite, so she knows what she's doing. This is Sean Forgetch's website, actually. He kind of helped me.
Really? He's starting to
Yeah, it's pretty good.
Wow.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, it's called Modern Data Engineering.
I'm gonna contact him about that.
It's cool. He does a good job. He goes into pretty advanced stuff, but if you're ready to go there, you can. This will link to like everything on his page related to Data Factory, but he has tons of other stuff. James Serra has a good blog. Really straightforward. I think it's just Blogspot, but he has really good content, so I put it up here. And of course, my company. I've written a few things about Data Factory. A couple other people have, but it's little tidbits. It's not here's how to use everything. It's like I think my last one was you can hack the JSON in the link service to make it more dynamic because it's not in the UI. Stuff like that. So got to plug my company a little bit, right? Okay, so I'm leaving it open. We have like 5-10 minutes, however long I'm going to take. If there are any questions or discussion from what I showed you tonight.
How do you control commit counts if you wanted to, commit every 5,000 records or?
Oh, like batch service?
Yeah.
You would have to control that with, I think, some type of metadata again. There is a staging option at some point. I don't know how to inherently do that with the UI. Have you run into that, Josh? I don't think so.
Didn't have that one.
But SSIS has that option, right? But nothing that I can think of from Data Factory. Be a good use case, though.
So do you have a sample cost model of processing the data through your automatic suppose as you terabyte of data, how much cost it aligns with a simple, medium, and complex software, how much you're
Right. So I will say that, first of all, there's a pricing guide on Azure. I can't give you figures right now, but if you're copying things within Azure, on the cloud, to the cloud, in Azure, it's very cheap and it's fast. If you're connecting to something that's outside of Azure, and especially on premises, you're going to incur more cost. So you can go through the pricing guide and see how that works. But I know, like, I was pulling stuff for an analysis services project, because Azure hosts analysis services in the cloud too. I was pulling some stuff from using that web command, the HTTPS web socket something or other, to pull some data that's public, and all of a sudden, I'm $50 over my subscription limit in one day.
Both quick.
Yeah, exactly. And I only ran it for like a half an hour. And I'm like,
Yeah,
oh,
you did a presentation on it too a long time ago.
Yeah.
On SQL Saturday, actually, Turner gave one on that, and yeah, the budget went away.
Yep.
You had to do a recording that after that too as well.
yeah.
But it was actually good.
And that's why my credit card is on my subscription in case something goes wrong. And then my wife yells at me, so.
Azure itself has a pricing calculator.
Yeah.
Is there one for Databricks as well that you can? I know
No.
the generic Azure one isn't granular enough to do different data.
I don't know, it's good. I haven't looked at the pricing calculator for Databricks within Azure. I'll have to take a look.
Pricing will vary greatly depending on region and what you're doing with it too. Our East Coast data centers were very near capacity 2 months ago, and so pricing there was significantly higher than the rest.
And it's all about the power of the copy activity, right? You can change how powerful it tries to pull data in. You can change the parallelism. So it's going to chunk out your copy by bytes at some point to get things in faster. So you can change those settings to, drop the cost down a bit. But the mistake I made is I just let it do its default thing. So all of a sudden I'm, $50 over at what I should be, but it's definitely like something you can change to help that out. But you lower the cost of your compute, it's slower, right? That's the trade-off. So, are there any questions, discussion points? Yeah.
So in other utilities, you have the concept of caching the data as well, right? And the runtime. So let's say you cache at the runtime and use it in the same data flows or workflows, or you can use that as a shared cache in the other data flows or workflows.
Oh,
Right. So let's say for informative data services, SSIS. So you're doing a lookup or let's say you're doing a join.
Mhm.
Cache it.
So it doesn't have to run the query again?
Yeah, it doesn't need to for, so let's say you have the master data or dimension data.
Yeah.
You can kind of create the cache of it. And the transaction data to join that and the runtime to use that cache instead of going back to the source or.
You can, there's nothing inherent in Data Factory to do that. So what you could do though is store the data through the pipeline. Like you look it up and it just pulls it through. So in that way, it's kind of caching and saving it for you for the other tasks. But there's nothing saying like, if I query it here in a pipeline and query it again with the same query in another lookup, it's going to treat it like a new query. It's not going to cache the data between the two. Yeah.
So my use case is, let's say I have, let's say, full master, for example, from onto my SQL database. And I'm joining that other 50 data flows in my factory.
Right.
So I would not want to go 50 times again to query that.
Yeah, you don't want to hammer the server, right? Yeah. Yeah, you'd have to construct it to not send the query back to your server so many times. But you can. You can. It's just not an inherent feature. You look concerned, Josh, is that just thinking through it. Okay. Okay. Good questions, though. Thank you. Are there any others? Otherwise, I can wrap up for the night. Okay. A little wrap up here. So that's me forcing my daughter on vacation to learn how to do a thumbs up. She wanted to play in the sand, so.
They're not very intuitive.
No, she's squinting her eyes. But thank you for coming. This is awesome. Again, as both the speaker and the president, I love having people in person and giving these talks every once in a while. Thanks for listening through some of the more technical stuff. I know that can be kind of hard on a Wednesday night after eating tons of pizza. So you can email me if you have any questions or just want to reach out at Talavant. I'll be very responsive there. I'm really bad at Twitter. I'll try to be responsive. I don't have many I don't know how to do Twitter.
Yeah, I'm the same. I have Twitter, I follow a couple people, and I just feel super awkward putting anything there.
Yeah. People follow me and I'm like, oh, hey, I'm right.
You're not going to like what I post.
I'm just following them.
Awesome.
You might get one tweet.
Okay, great.
Yes, it was. He was like, I don't know how to name this. Name it after someone great. Like, Josh. Oh, okay.
Please, as a reminder, take a moment and fill out our survey. Even if you think Turner here is amazing and there's nothing they can improve upon, we'd still like to know what future topics Turner can present upon them. So,
And go back to your companies and see if anyone wants to talk here, that'd be great.
Yeah.
Yeah, or if you guys want to, don't be afraid, get up there. You did it.
I mean, look at me. Look at me.
It wasn't too
Jeez.
serious.
Yeah, actually before joining PASS and Talavant, I never did public speaking, so it was a good, segue into all that.
It's actually how Turner and I first met. He was speaking in Sequel Saturday 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And then I sat down and listened to him. That was really good. And then before you know it, all of a sudden I ran in here and like, what are you doing?
Someone made me president, I don't know. Yeah, so the speaker feedback also within PASS. Don't be intimidated by that. I mean, it's always positive. It's like, you couldn't hear you in the back, just speak up next time, stuff like that. So, and even someone who's been speaking now for a few years, I appreciate the feedback. Any seasoned person loves the feedback too, so if you could fill those up too, that'd be great. And that's it. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much. There aren't any questions online, I take it.